Hello friends, good morning. This is Professor Girish Atnikar from Department of Mechanical Engineering, Angadi Institute of Technology and Management, Belgaum. So I welcome you all for today's session. In the today's session, we will be dealing with module number 5, Finite Element Analysis 17ME61. So module number 5, first we need to know what is a axisymmetric solid element. So I just drawn an example. There are many of these kind. Okay, the elements may be of different shape. Here I have given you the definition of a symmetric solid element, axisymmetric solid element. So an axisymmetric solid element is a thick walled body which is three-dimensional, generated by rotating a plane, and is most easily described in cylindrical coordinates, where Z is called as axis of symmetry. Right, if you just carefully observe this diagram, so you can just take this triangular element 1, 2, 3. If this triangular element is going to rotate, instead you can say it as revolve. If this triangular element is going to revolve with respect to this Z axis, then this entire frustum of cone will be formed, right? So such kind of elements we call them as axisymmetric solid elements. It is a thick element generated by rotating a plane. In this case, the plane is the triangular element. It is rotated with respect to this Z axis, or it is revolved with respect to this Z axis, so that this entire frustum of cone is formed. So such elements we call them as axisymmetric solid elements. Sorry. So there are few conditions which are to be satisfied for axisymmetric analysis, right? If you want to go for axisymmetric analysis of such kind of elements, there are three conditions which are to be satisfied. Which are those that we need to know, important from your exam point of view? The first condition is the problem domain must be symmetric about the axis of revolution, which is conventionally taken as Z axis. Right? The problem domain must be symmetric about the axis of revolution, which is conventionally taken as Z axis. Right? So Z axis is the axis of revolution. Next, all boundary conditions must be satisfied and must be symmetric about the axis of revolution. Right? If you are dividing this particular diagram, right, if you are dividing this particular diagram into one half and other half, suppose this is first half, on the other side if it is second half, then the boundary conditions should be same and it should be satisfying on both the sides, right? So that is what is the meaning of second point. All boundary conditions must be symmetric about the axis of revolution. What do you mean by symmetric? It should be mirror image, right? So it should be same on either side. Third one, all loading elements must be symmetric about the axis of revolution, right? Even the loads what we apply on these kind of elements should be symmetric in nature. So if these three conditions are satisfied, then we can take up such a problem for axisymmetric analysis. Even if any one of these is not met, then we cannot go for the analysis part. Right, so we got to know what is the axisymmetric element, how it is formed, what are the conditions to be satisfied. So now we will be taking up an important derivation. So the heading of the derivation is derivation of a shape function for axisymmetric triangular element. Right, I am taking the same triangular element. You can just check it out. This triangular element, this is Z axis, this is R axis. So since it is revolving, so I have shown this angle theta. So basically this is R axis and this is Z axis. So I have taken up the same element here. Right, so derivation of a shape function for a axisymmetric triangular element. So I have shown Z axis, I have shown R axis, I have shown the triangular element. These are node number 1, 2 and 3. So let U1, U2, U3 and W1, W2 and W3 be the nodal displacements in R and Z directions respectively. Right, so U1, U2, U3, these are the displacements in which direction? R direction. And W1, W2 and W3 are the displacements in Z direction. So that is what I have mentioned. Right, so the next step is Okay, since the triangular element has 2 degrees of freedom at each node, it will have 6 generalized coordinates. Right, I showed you 3 nodal displacements, right, u1 w1, u2 w2 and u3 w3. So if there are 6 displacements, it means that degrees of freedom at each node will be 2. So totally there will be 6 generalized coordinates. So the displacement functions are assumed as a1 plus a2r plus a3z, that is for u. Then for w I continue this. After a3 it is a4 plus a5r plus a6z. Right, we are getting r and z. In this case, if it was a linear case, then you may have taken it as x and y. Right, since it is a cylindrical coordinate case, we need to take the coordinates r and z. Now same thing at node 1, 2, 3, you need to put the respective values. So at node 1, u1 is equal to a1 plus a2. This r becomes r1, z becomes z1. Right, similarly at node 2, r becomes r2, z becomes z2. Similarly at node 3, a1 remains as it is, right, a2 also remains as it is. This r becomes r3 and z becomes z3. So at respective nodes I got u1, u2, u3. Right, now I express this in the form of matrix. Right, if I express it in the form of the matrix, expressing above equations in the form of the matrix, we'll get this u1, u2, u3. Right, so u1, u2, u3. I can just check out u1, u2, u3, that I have written it here. Constants are a1, a2, a3, so I have noted it here. Now the coefficients you need to note down, such that if you multiply these two brackets or matrices, you should get back these equations. Right, so it is a1 into 1 is a1 plus a2 into r1, a2 into r1 plus a3 into z1. So in a similar manner I have written all the coefficients. In the second case, the coefficients are 1 a2 sorry 1 r2 and z2. Here it is 1 r3 and z3. That is how you get this matrix. But we are interested in the constant part, a1, a2, a3. So you take it onto the left side. If you are taking it onto the left side, right, so if you are shifting this particular thing on the other side, it becomes inverse. If you are keeping it on the right side, it will be the normal matrix. If I keep it here itself, because I am in need of a1, a2, a3, and if you shift this matrix onto the left side, it becomes u1, u2, u3 divided by this matrix. So if you take this matrix into the numerator, it becomes inverse. Right, so that is how you got the next step. So I am interested in finding out a1, a2, a3. So in order to find a1, a2, a3, I need to find the inverse of this. So I'll take this matrix as A matrix. Right, so here A is equal to, I have written here. Same, this matrix I have copied it here. So you know that A inverse is adjoint of A divided by determinant of A. So adjoint of A is transpose of matrix of cofactors. C is matrix of cofactors. If you take the transpose of this, you will be getting adjoint of A divided by determinant of A. Right, so next, so you are aware how to find out the cofactors, yet I'll repeat it for the first three. Suppose we are going for a11, right, a11, that is at this part, first element a11. So you need to take it as minus 1 raised to 1 plus 1. Why 1 plus 1? Because you are having 1 and 1. Same 1 and 1 you need to add it here. So first row and first column you need to eliminate in the A matrix. Right, I repeat, first row and first column you need to eliminate in the A matrix. So if you do that, this is gone and this is gone. Remaining are R2Z3, R2Z3 minus R3Z2. That is what I have written, R2Z3 minus R3Z2. Right, so that is how you get A11. A12, minus 1 raised to 1 plus 2. Why 1 plus 2? I told you, whatever is the subscript written here, same thing you need to add it as power. So it is first row and second column. So first row is completely eliminated, this is completely eliminated, and the second one is eliminated. Remaining is Z3 into 1 is Z3 minus Z2. That is what I have written here, Z3 minus Z2. Right? Just because this minus 1 raised to 3 becomes a minus sign, so this will change to Z2 minus Z3. Similarly, A13, so it is first row and third column, first row and column number 3, right? So remaining will be R3 minus R2. So that is what I have written here, R3 minus R2. So 1 plus 3 is 4, minus raised to even number is always plus, so it remains as R3 minus R2. Right? Similarly, A21, that is second row and first column. Right? If you take second row, if you just strike this out, and first column, remaining elements are R1 Z3 minus R3 and Z1. That is what I have written here. Why I have taken 2 plus 1? Because the subscript here is 2 plus 1. So minus 1 raised to anything which is odd number will be minus sign, so I will be getting a minus sign here. If I take that minus sign inside this bracket, this R1 Z3 will be negative and R3 Z1 will be positive. Right, so that is how you need to calculate all the cofactors, all the 9 cofactors. So once if you do that, the next step will be to calculate the determinant. Why? Because if you want to find out the inverse, you also need to know the determinant. Without knowing the determinant, you cannot find the inverse. Right, so this is the A matrix and you need to find the determinant of this. So I have taken it as plus minus plus. So here there is 1, so R2 into Z3 minus R3 into Z2 minus R1, I have kept it as it is, Z3 minus Z2 plus Z1 as it is, R3 minus R2. Right, so that is the determinant. So A inverse is equal to determinant of A into adjoint of A. Okay, sorry, A inverse is equal to adjoint of A divided by determinant of A. So 1 divided by determinant of A value I have just copied it here, and adjoint of A, so this is adjoint of A. Whatever cofactors I have got previously, I need to arrange them into a matrix of cofactors, then I need to take the transpose of that. After taking the transpose of that, I will be getting this, and this is the adjoint. So this is adjoint of A and this is determinant of A. So overall I will be getting A inverse. So equation 3 becomes, which was equation 3, right? And this is equation 3, A1, A2, A3. This is what I have got. This is A inverse, U1, U2, U3 is as it is. So this value I need to substitute in equation 3. What is this value? I have got that value now. So equation 3 becomes, okay, A1, A2, A3 as it is, 1 divided by determinant of A into adjoint of A, and this is U1, U2, U3, right? So U1, U2, U3 are the displacements. I kept them as it is. Next, area of the triangular element can be expressed as a function of R comma Z. Okay, this is R comma Z, it's not R1Z, R comma Z coordinates as. So if you want to express the area of the triangular element, what I have considered in terms of R and Z coordinates, which are cylindrical coordinates, then it can be done as 2A is equal to whatever is the value of determinant, whatever value you have got of the determinant, that you need to copy it down. Okay, now this step is important. Why it is important? Here in this derivation as well as in your exams, you need to take this directly, because you just need to remember the determinant whatever you have got by calculating, that is equal to 2A, right? I hope it is easy to remember, because you are not remembering the RHS part. RHS part you will be getting by calculating the determinant. Only your LHS part you need to remember that it is equal to 2A. It's not that we will not be getting this if we simplify. We will get it, but it takes a lot of time as well as space, which is not feasible from your exam point of view. Yet after this video I will be posting one more video where I will be just showing how the area of the element will be equal to 2a, right? So in that video you can get the more detailed thing about this, but as far as this video or this session is considered, you just see to it that you remember that determinant is equal to 2 times the area. Now if you substitute all those things, equation 4 becomes, so a1 a2 a3 1 divided by 2a, so determinant part is replaced by 2a, then alpha 1 alpha 2 alpha 3 beta 1 beta 2 beta 3 and u1 u2 u3, right, which is equation 4. This was equation 4. Now 1 divided by this part, this entire part will be equal to 2a, right? So that entire part equal to 2a, that is what I have written here. So I will take it as 1 divided by 2a. Now these elements 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9, I take them as alpha 1 alpha 2 alpha 3 beta 1 beta 2 beta 3 gamma 1 gamma 2 gamma 3, right? And u1 u2 u3 I'll keep it as u1 u2 u3 only. I am not making any of the changes. So your simplified version will be like this, and I have just written what is the value of alpha 1 alpha 2 alpha 3 in each of the cases, right? Now once if this is done, the next step would be okay, from equation 1, what was our equation 1? I'll just show it to you. Equation 1 was a1 plus a2r plus a3z. The same thing I have copied here from equation 1, a1 plus a2r plus a3z. Now if you are going to express this equation in matrix form, it will be like this: 1rz a1 a2 a3. Now substituting equation 5 in equation 6, we know that this is equation 6. What was our equation number 5? I will show you what is our equation number 5. This is our equation number 5, a1 a2 a3. So 5. So I need to substitute the value of a1 a2 a3, that is this part, right? So this part I will be substituting in my equation number 6. So that is what I have done here. One rz a1 a2 a3 value, I put it as 1 by 2a, this matrix into this matrix. Now if I multiply this matrix and divided by this, what I will be getting? Alpha 1 into 1 is alpha 1, beta 1 into r is plus beta 1 r, gamma 1 into z plus z into gamma 1 divided by 2a. So this 2a is common for all these elements. Similarly, alpha 2 into 1 is alpha 2, beta 2 into r plus gamma 2 into z divided by 2a. It similarly you will be getting the third one, and u1 u2 u3 you just retain it as it is. Now also from the definition of shape function, okay, in the first class we have studied the definition of shape function. We know that n1 u1 plus n2 u2 plus n3 u3, right? Now expressing this general form of a shape function in matrix form, will be getting n1 n2 n3 u1 u2 u3. Now if you compare your equation number 7, that is the previous equation, and equation number 8, right? I hope equation number 8 is visible to you, n1 n2 n3 and u1 u2 u3. Now I'll show you the equation number 7, and on the LHS side it is just u, RHS side it is like this: u1 u2 u3. You can just check out n1 n2 n3 u1 u2 u3. So this is n1, this is n2, this is n3, u1 u2 u3. So by comparing equation 7 and 8, what will be getting? This is n1, this is n2, this is n3. So we got the values of three shape functions, n1 n2 n3, right? So that's it. That is the end of the derivation. So at times the next step, it is not mandatory. You can wind up your derivation at this particular point itself. Now the next step is just for your reference and which you should know. Okay, next also w is n1 w1 plus n2 w2 plus n3 w3. Once again the general form of shape function. Expressing it in matrix form, you will be getting it as n1 n2 n3 w1 w2 w3. Now both u and w, if you are going to write it in general, it is just a general displacement function. So I have just written here the displacement function is given by what are the degrees of freedom, u1 w1, u2 w2, u3 w3, right? Now for the first case, that is for u case, all w's will be 0. So wherever w comes, that should be taken as 0. u1 into n1, w is not there for u, so it becomes 0. n2 u2, w is not there for u, so it becomes 0. n3 u3, last term is not there because w is not there in this displacement, so it is taken as 0. Similarly, in the second step, I am writing for w where these u terms are not going to come, so u1 into 0 is 0, n1 w1, once again u term becomes 0, n2 w2, once again u term becomes 0, 0 into u3, and n3 w3. So this last step is just to show you how the displacement function is represented. This is not mandatory for you in your examinations, so you can stop your derivation at this particular point itself, right? So I hope things are clear. Thank you. Please do subscribe my channel, share it with your friends. That's it for today's session. Have a good day. Take care.